The following is a presentation of the Belly Up Sports Media Network.
What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of the Eye Test, brought to you by the Belly Up Sports Media Network. I'm your host, John Kirkner, alongside with Bobby Amendola and Paul Orlando. And today's episode is the Fantasy Doghouse. We've been doing it every week, tracking players' inconsistencies and their performance as well. We've had a couple players go from the Doghouse all the way to the Freedom stage. We've had players go from Doghouse to Probationary Portal to Doghouse, and a bunch of players land on Bust Island, which is the last place that you want to go. But of course, with every episode, we got to celebrate the players that are free. We've got two of them this week, and that is Breece Hall and Alexander Mattison.
Yeah, Breece Hall and Alexander Mattison find their way to freedom. And Bob, I know you are particularly tickled about Breece Hall.
I told John.
Yes, you did. And Breece Hall put up another stellar performance. We're seeing the snap percentage. We're seeing that rise. He's now played 66% of snaps in week 6. What's your thing say? Oh, what's an ACL? Breece Hall? Yeah. He is running full motor on it. He looks great. 20 points again, 2 weeks in a row with 20-plus points. He has earned himself freedom. He does get a bye this week, which makes him even healthier. And then he looks to kick off the Giants, Chargers, and Raiders. All three should be great games for him. Yeah. So looking good for him. And then Alex Madison. I feel like Alex Madison's like a yo-yo. We're going to be yo-yoing him around a bit, I think, with this Vikings offense. It's super inconsistent, but he did meet his projections again for the fourth week in a row, double-digit points, something you would expect from a guy like him. So, Alex Madison, I don't really have much to say about you. Congrats, I guess. You were involved in the pass game, which really helped you out here. So, I don't know. Don't be too excited about Alex Madison, though, but it was enough to earn him a ticket to freedom.
Yeah, I think we were just tired of sending him back to the Doghouse. I mean, he is doing what is expected for him. He was drafted. He's performing the standard of where he was drafted, which is fine. So, congratulations, Alexander Madison. We don't ever want to talk about you again.
Dead zone running back.
Yeah, dead zone running back. Exactly.
Yeah, we just honestly wanted to get him out of our hair. This has nothing to do with. Just tired of seeing Alex Madison on the prep notes every week. I'm like, guys, we got to end this.
Yeah. All right, let's go over to the probationary portal. This one's always fun here. We got a lot of players in the probationary portal. Lots of players from the Doghouse, including all 3 Cowboys that we sent last week. It's like they all met up and they're like, yo, we gotta prove these guys from the eye test wrong. We're headed right to the probationary portal. And that is what they all did, amongst others, Bob.
Yep. So, this is probably one of our biggest probationary portals in recent weeks, especially with all these guys coming from the Doghouse. So kudos to all these guys. We got Garrett Wilson, who is still actually playing pretty well with Zach Wilson, given the circumstances. 17 fantasy points, 12 targets, 8 catches for 90 yards. Still no touchdowns since week 2. We want to see those touchdowns, increase a little bit. It'll be tough with Zach Wilson, but nonetheless, he ends up in the probationary portal. We were on Jalen Waddle a lot last week, and we were, pretty uncertain of whether he was actually going to break out. I wouldn't say this is a true breakout game for him, given his high standards and draft capital, but he did have a season high 18 fantasy points. Not averaging a ton of yards per catch, but still good enough to get him in the portal. Ramondre Stevenson, one of our most improved. If you watched our previous Fantasy Awards episode, he had 2 points in week 5, put up 18 fantasy points this week after actually getting hurt mid-game and coming back and playing pretty well. So maybe he's turning a corner. He's in the probationary portal now. Finally, again, kind of the same thing with CeeDee Lamb. Not a true breakout game given his standards, but he did catch all 7 of his targets for 117 yards. Again, we want to see those touchdowns increase because that will put him back into where we really expect, which is kind of like, the low 20s range, which is what you really expect from your first round pick.
He did sneak in 1 touchdown.
He got a touchdown yesterday?
I believe so. Yes, we can double check.
No, he didn't.
No? Okay.
No.
Oh, that was Brandon Cooks. We will talk about him later.
Okay. And then we move on to Tony Pollard, who I'm still a little worried about given that he's not been particularly effective on the ground. 15 attempts this past week against the Chargers, who we know are Swiss cheese on defense. 15 attempts for 30 yards, 2 yards a carry. Not really great. Made up for it in the passing game, though. Had 17 fantasy points altogether, six catches for 80 yards, and had a pretty big play that helped him get to that
I think he had a 60
level.
yarder.
Yeah, something like that. So, good enough to get him in the portal, but I'm still a little bit worried about him. Then we have Chris Olave, who, again, I would say for where he was drafted isn't really living up to expectations, but he did have 16 fantasy points on 10 targets this week. No touchdowns, kind of a common theme with these guys. These guys aren't getting in the end zone, but Derek Carr also can't throw the ball really past the line of scrimmage, so that's probably the issue there. But good game for Olave, 7 catches for 96 yards. He's in the probationary portal now from the Doghouse. And a quarterback here. Dak Prescott got the one-way ticket to the Doghouse last week, and we were definitely uncertain of whether he would get himself out of the Doghouse, but he got a cake matchup against the Chargers, and he was 21 for 30, 272 yards, 1 touchdown, no picks, which is these days is very surprising for Dak Prescott. And he earned himself a ticket into the probationary portal, and we will see if any of these guys will be able to get themselves out into freedom following week 7.
Yeah, and it looks like so all 3 Cowboys and Garrett Wilson all have buys next week. So they're going to have to hang out there for a little bit. We'll see. Cowboys in week 8, I believe, are playing the Eagles. So it'll be quite the rivalry, and Dak tends to do pretty good against the Eagles.
He does, and he was QB1 this week too.
Yep, exactly. Is that definitely true? Is he definitely playing?
Yeah, that's what I saw that, and I was like, I don't know if that's...
No, he was the QB1. I just want to double check if he's playing the Eagles. Okay, no, he's playing the Rams and then the Eagles. But pretty easy matchup for Dak coming up the next 3 weeks. Rams, Eagles, Giants.
He had I didn't see he had a rushing touchdown also. Okay, so that really boosted him.
It was a low-scoring week for quarterbacks, and that shows by Dak being the number 1 quarterback, which was like 24 points. No 30-point quarterbacks this week. Lots of wide receivers and running backs. So congratulations to those guys getting out of the Doghouse, and almost all of them within a week. So congrats to them. Let's head on over to the Doghouse and talk about. First.
Wow, it's crowded.
It's getting very crowded. So not much to say about these guys. Everyone is still here from the previous week, except one guy, which we thought was going to be there every single week. That's Kyle Pitts. We were saying he was droppable. And if you listen to us, I hope you then went back on the waiver wire and picked him up, because for the last 2 weeks, he has scored double digits. So he earns himself a spot in the Doghouse now. He's got to perform well for another 2 weeks to get free. Yes, that's why you do not want to end up in Bust Island. It is a lot harder to break free. Brandon Cooks, another notable player to mention. Like I said earlier, he did have a touchdown. So he had a season high 15 points, but in Bust Island, you got to perform well twice, which we will find out in week 8 if he can find himself into the Doghouse, just like Kyle Pitts did. Joe Burrow. We sent him to Bust Island. He proved us wrong, and then he proved us right. Joe Burrow is doing the exact same thing that he's been doing all year, not producing to the numbers that he's projected to. So he's back on that 2-week timer. That 2-week timer, he's in solitary confinement on Bust Island. He's got 2 weeks on Bust Island, then another 2 weeks in the Doghouse. So we'll see how Joe Burrow does. And we got 3 new members, actually. We got Jackson Smith and Jigba. It's about time we throw him in. Granted, he was a rookie. He's a wide receiver 3 on the Seahawks. But I think it was just because of his NFL draft capital, being the first wide receiver taken off the board, that led everyone to boost his ADP in fantasy. he was being taken in the 7th or 8th
He was,
round.
dude. He went in the He went at pick 609 in our redraft league.
Yes, which is a keeper. So I would think that in a full redraft league, he's probably hanging out in the 7th round. Still way too high.
Yeah.
7 picks,
Yeah.
that's still your starting roster. No point in going after players like that. Let's all remember this for next year. And hey, we had a lot of conversations about the rookies. Some of us were saying Jordan Addison. I know I was on the Quentin Johnson train, which even with Mike Williams out,
Yikes.
not happening. But Jordan Addison, he has stayed out of the doghouse all year. The next member joining on Bust Island would be Jerry Jeudy. He was talk about high draft capital, 4th round in our league, probably 5th in most. But geez, man, Jerry Jeudy. It seemed like Steve Smith prosecuted him for us last week, right before the Thursday night football game. Did you guys see that?
Yeah, I did. I thought it was a low blow, but
verbal murder. I would agree. I don't think wide receivers should be talking down on players like that. But I think what really started that whole thing was Steve Smith is an analyst. He gave his opinion on Jeudy and then went to go apologize in person, which I do think is a class act.
Yeah.
He did not need to do that. And so he did it. And of course, this is Steve Smith's story. I don't know if he actually did do it, but he said he did. And then Jerry Jeudy had some choice words to say for him. So, and then he followed it up with a 4-point dud or whatever it was. So
yeah,
Jeudy sucked.
We all
does suck.
We all kind of fell for the Jerry Jeudy hype in the offseason. And towards the end of the season, I just went back to his last 6 games. I'll just go through it quick. 10 points, 33 points, 14 points, 19, 10, and 26.
Really
That was to conclude last season. So there was reason to be bullish on Jerry Jeudy going into this season, especially with Sean Payton coming in and people expecting Russell Wilson to be a little bit better. So it wasn't really like a bad decision, but in hindsight, obviously, when unfortunately you're my friend Paul Orlando, who drafted him at the 401, in hindsight, it just doesn't look good at all when he's the wide receiver 61.
Right.
Yeah. I bought the hype on Jeudy. Like a lot of us did, I bought the hype and the whole Sean Payton. I mean, I think we all kind of saw like, oh my God, this is going to be Denver's version of Michael Thomas. Like this is going to be insane. We're talking 15 targets, 10 catches, 100 yards, a touchdown here and there. And it's just been bad. But the one thing I do want to say is I know JSN's a rookie wide receiver in there. You know what? Rookie wide receiver is actually playing extremely well this year.
Oh, Zay Flowers.
Zay Flowers. That's right.
Yeah.
I had to plug my guy in there, Zay Flowers. I absolutely love you. I will be buying your jersey because I think you're going to be a Raven for life. The dude is just electric. I love you, Zay Flowers. He's going to be my new Rashad White. I think I'm going to do that. I'm going to make Zay Flowers my new Rashad White.
That's reasonable because Zay Flowers is actually good.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, speaking of Rashad White, he also finds himself in Bust Island. Paul turned a new leaf, a new chapter, and he has finally given up. Ladies and gentlemen, Paul Orlando hates Rashad White. He had 3 catches for 12 yards. That was his whole thing, Paul. You said last week's episode, I guess he's just going to have to, have 15 catches for 150 yards. Did not happen. Not even close. 3 catches for 12 yards, 7 carries for 26 yards. He's not even getting volume. It's one thing if he was getting volume. He's not even getting volume. And I think it was the creamsicle jerseys that did it because the Buccaneers record in creamsicle jerseys is so bad.
Yeah, I think like my little side caption says, I'm no longer in denial on Rashad White. As soon as I looked down and saw him not even have 10 touches in the run game and not being much of a factor with check down Baker, I'm done on the guy. He is unfortunately, I have to start him because I have Nick Chubb and Aaron Jones who have not been playing. They were 2 of my first 3 picks, so that's fantastic.
Paul. Say it.
What?
Rashad White is a
bad
Rashad White is a bust and a bum
and a bad running back.
And a bad running back.
Shouldn't even belong in the NFL.
I'm Team Zay Flowers now. Okay, I'm Team Zay Flowers now. But Rashad White, yeah, you're a bum, and you're actually starting to make me mad because I've been tooting your horn for the past year and a half.
Well, Paul, it's a good lesson for everyone listening and watching on YouTube because there's nothing wrong with changing your opinion on a fantasy player. It's like the stock market, guys. If you're watching a stock drop, you sound like an idiot. Sorry, Paul, I'm not saying you are an idiot, but when you talk about things like that, it's like, hey, man, the proof is in the pudding. He's not good, or that stock is not going to go to the moon. So keep in mind, guys, there's nothing wrong. So many people are in fantasy denial, and it's like, just get over it, move on. You're going to be wrong a million times when you have your predictions. Just accept it and find another guy that could be the next hot commodity, like say flowers. But I've said enough. Let's move over to the fantasy doghouse. We've got players staying. We've got players entering. If you're watching on YouTube, these players on the screen here is everyone combined here. These are the players staying and entering. We will start off with the one and only player staying in the doghouse, the only player in the doghouse that could not find himself into the portal. Again, not eclipsing 20 points against the Broncos, and that's Patrick Mahomes.
Yeah, it has been kind of rough sledding for Patrick Mahomes, where if you watched last week's episode, go and check, or if you haven't watched last week's episode, go and check that out. But if you did watch it, we had a court case on Patty Mahomes, and it just has not been pretty for him this year. 18.34 fantasy points. He did throw his 5th interception of the season. He barely squeaked out a win against the horrid Denver Broncos defense, and he just has not been meeting his projections. Like we said, he was a 2nd-round pick at least. I mean, you could have made cases for him to be the last pick in the 1st round. It has just not been good for Patrick Mahomes.
Sorry, my computer was about to die. I guess it wasn't charged in, so we're back. But yeah, Patrick Mahomes, do better, dude. And I would just like to say, I know I defended him last week in the court case. I would just like to say, Patrick Mahomes, you are 1 game away below 20 points to being sent to Bust Island, dude. Trevor Lawrence is putting up the same amount of points as you, and he was drafted 4 rounds later, and he's in Bust Island. I'll give you 1 more week, Patty, 1 more week, and you're going on the next ferry to Bust Island, and you're joining all the other quarterbacks like Joe Burrow and Trevor Lawrence who are putting up the same amount of points as you. Oh, you're doing 3 points better a week. I don't care. You just played the Broncos, and you threw, 1 touchdown? Get it together, dude. And
Wow. Bob,
John.
I'm
we are seeing a turn of events from John, who's usually the elite quarterback defender.
I'm over it. He was like you said, he was a 1st-round draft pick, early 2nd at best. And either way, I mean, you're expecting your 2nd-rounders to put up 20 points too. And you'll accept a few teens, but Patty Mahomes is all teens. So get it together, dude. You're supposed to be the number 1 quarterback, and you suck. He's still the number 4 quarterback, which is padding his stats.
I just think it's funny. I just think it's funny that a lot of us were on this train where kind of last season we were like, you need an elite quarterback. Elite quarterbacks are valued heavily in dynasty, but not so much in redraft. That kind of was changing this offseason, but now it might be turning again because high quarterbacks that were drafted really high outside of like Josh Allen and Jalen Hurts, who are performing very well this year. Patrick Mahomes is underperforming. Joe Burrow's underperforming. Trevor Lawrence is underperforming. I can make a case even Lamar Jackson is underperforming. Mm-hmm. So, it's fantasy football is funny. That's for sure. Things change very quick.
It just goes to show that these types of shows, yes, we're offering advice because we do fantasy all the time. But at the end of the day, we're just trying to entertain you guys. Listen to us, yes, but, we're going to be wrong. And that's the sad truth.
That's the nice thing about being a fantasy football analyst. We're like meteorologists. You can be wrong half the time and you still have a really good job.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. All right, so that's the only guy staying in the doghouse. Let's get to the guys entering the doghouse. This guy in yesterday's episode earned an award right to the doghouse. He was a 2-time award winner in yesterday's episode. He won week loser and an immediate ticket to the doghouse. That's Davante Adams, Bob.
Yeah, and we talked about Davante Adams a bunch this week. It's 2 single-digit point games in a row is very bad for a guy that was probably your first-round pick, if not a very, very early second-round pick. And we all thought it was going to be amazing for him this year. I'm not really sure what happened or if this is really going to continue at this point because he's still Davante Adams. He is still capable of putting up 25 plus, 30 plus points every single week, regardless of the quarterback situation. But you just don't expect single digit point games, especially multiple weeks in a row for a guy that was drafted this high, for a guy that has been producing for this long. He gets, I mean, they get the Chicago Bears next week. So it's a perfect get right game for him, regardless of, I don't even care if Jimmy G sits. I don't care if it's Aiden O'Connell or Brian Hoyer starting. He should be able to meet his projections against the Chicago Bears because their defense is terrible. And I expect him to be able to enter the probationary portal after week 7.
Yeah, you got to start Davante Adams. You also have to start Bijan Robinson, who's entering the doghouse here. He was drafted in the first round as well.
We have Bijan entering the doghouse?
Oh, yeah. First round draft pick for sure.
For what? You hate a top caliber running back who sees 6+ targets in the pass game every week?
I mean, he's just not getting any volume.
Whoa. Guys. Forget it. We just got to go to court. I don't want to hear this anymore.
All right. Let's go to court. Let's do it. Bijan Robinson. Quarters in session.
I am your
New York City, where crime incredibly.
All right, guys. This is the Amendola courtroom. Thank you for being here. John will be prosecuting the case for Bijan Robinson entering the doghouse. Mr. Orlando Esquire will be defending Bijan Robinson from entering the doghouse. Gentlemen, you will each have 1 minute at most to make your arguments. I am going to set the timer here so you don't go over that minute. 1 minute, that's all you get. And then, of course, you'll get your short closing arguments as well. Mr. Orlando, or actually, no, Mr. Kirkner, make your case starting now.
Bijan Robinson was a highly touted running back compared to Saquon Barkley, Todd Gurley, Leonard Fournette, all first-round running backs taken in the NFL draft, also taken in the first round of your fantasy draft. Some were even saying take him over CMC because Bijan is bust-proof. And granted, I would still agree with that. He is bust-proof, but he's not putting up the potential that we all thought he was. He started off the year hot, 20 points, 23 points. Oh, Bijan, you're great. Showed us a little taste with 10 points, then 20 points. Bijan, we still love you. But then back-to-back weeks of 11 points and 13 points. And what makes things worse is he has not had more than 19 attempts yet in the rushing game. In fact, the last 4 weeks, he has averaged 12 rushing attempts. It's the volume, everyone. It's the volume. Bijan is getting red zone vultured by Tyler Algier still. They're getting into the red zone, and they're putting Tyler Algier in. And it's absolutely ridiculous. Bijan, you need to do better and score some freaking rushing touchdowns. Thank you.
Very good, Mr. Kirkner. You went just over your allotted time of 1 minute, but I think that was good enough. You were at like 1:10, and we'll take that here. You know, if you go over a little bit, it's no worries. The judge will not hold it against you, and nor will the jury. I have made sure of that. So we can go a little over a minute. Just don't drag it out too much.
Mr. Orlando, I'd recommend starting a timer because that's going to be the fastest minute of your life. Because I did it. I did, and I looked down, and I was like, oh.
Mr. Orlando Esquire, you have your time.
Sure. I'm not even going to start a timer because I'm going to make this pretty short and sweet for you, Judge Amendola. Bijan Robinson is a rookie in an offense where we know that Arthur Smith does not care about your fantasy team. Yet we are still seeing elite level opportunities. Yes, John mentioned his rushes, but he failed to show the jury of how involved Bijan Robinson is in the pass game. He is constantly seeing 5, 6, 8 targets in the pass game. He is catching most of them for 4 or 5 catches, 43 yards, 32 yards, 48 yards through the air. And the one thing we are lacking is touchdowns. And believe me, those will come for my client, Mr. Robinson. He is way too talented to not be a red zone threat in this offense. They will come. We've seen the capability of him with the 20 points, the 21 points, the 18.7 points. Sure, he's only giving you double-digit points here, but boo-hoo. Those are touchdowns away from being elite performances, and I think that Bijan Robinson is too talented to see the doghouse.
Thank you, Mr. Orlando. That was very convincing. And you will each now have 10 seconds for your closing arguments. Mr. Kirkner, let me set my timer real quick.
No need.
You have 10 seconds.
What's something that all first-round players have in common? Volume and touchdowns. Maybe Bijan is getting passing volume. He's not getting rushing volume, and he's not getting touchdowns. Thank you.
That's a tough one. Tough one, Mr. Orlando. Tough one, Mr. Orlando.
All right. Well,
Okay.
if my client is unrightfully, and as John loves to point out, the Eighth Amendment, if he is cruelly punished here in this case, let's just say he has Tampa, Tennessee, Minnesota, and Arizona as his next 4 games, and I'm sure I will be holding my client's hand to freedom very soon.
All right, guys. The jury and myself are going to have a very tough time with this case. This is probably the toughest case we've had come into this court to date. You both have made very compelling arguments. However, you guys know I am a stan for draft capital. All that matters in this world is draft capital. And although Mr. Orlando, I do agree with you. He's been consistent. He hasn't produced a single-digit point game yet this season. And although I do believe he will also exit the doghouse sooner rather than later, draft capital is the most important thing in fantasy football, and he is not living up. He was being drafted ahead of guys like Stephon Diggs in some cases, who is the wide receiver too, and it's just unacceptable regardless of how he's being utilized by Arthur Smith. So I am ruling in favor of Mr. Kirkner, Bijan Robinson, to the doghouse.
Get your ass in there.
Well fought, Mr. Kirkner. Very well fought.
Thank you. I went 0 for 2 last week, so it felt good to be back in the winning seat here. So Bijan joins all the others entering the doghouse. Like you said, Paul, Bijan has Tampa Bay next week, so I can see Bijan putting up his projection of 16 points. Tennessee, Minnesota, Arizona. It's looking good for him. I think it's going to be a short stint for Bijan, but we have to go off of the recent weeks, which is, in my eyes, 2 weeks against not so good defenses in Houston and Washington, and he actually performed worse than he did against other better defenses like Green Bay, Jacksonville. So yeah, Bijan's got Tampa Bay next week. I think he will get out. Another guy entering the doghouse, one of my own, Davante Smith. In 3 out of the last 4 games, he's had single-digit points. It is not looking good for him. Last week against the Jets, their first loss got handed to them. He did get a lot of volume, which is nice. He's been very wishy-washy, with his volume. If you're on Sleeper, he's been in the green and the yellow almost every other week. But he missed a very, very catchable ball, a valuable catchable ball, too, in that game, which could have been his 6th catch. So he only had 5 catches for 44 yards, did nothing after the catch. In the last month, he has not scored a touchdown. That's the big one. We like to see those Eagles receivers scoring touchdowns. It's been a lot of rushing touchdowns with DeAndre Swift and Jalen Hurts. They've been the most of those touchdowns for the team. And also they're scoring a lot less touchdowns. So the chances of scoring a touchdown are much lower too. Eagles are a bottom 3 team in the red zone. So Eagles wide receivers, although AJ Brown is killing it in volume and he's still he's definitely a top 10 wide receiver. I don't even need to look, but I don't know what range in that, but he's not scoring touchdowns either. So Eagles wide receivers, risky play. A.J. Brown still an automatic start. Devontae Smith is a flex player right now. And if you're injury riddled, I guess you're fitting him into your wide receiver too, but you're taking a chance every week. Next week, he's got the Miami game. Again, you just don't know with Eagles wide receivers. I am expecting a shootout. He's projected 13 points. I'm going to go ahead and say Devontae Smith finds himself into the probationary portal.
Yeah, and one more thing on Davante Smith before we move on is he, after being a mid-third round, potentially early third-round pick in your fantasy leagues, he is at the wide receiver 28 on the season after week 6.
Oof. All right. Yeah, dude, that is not looking good for him. All right, well, let's go ahead and talk about another guy entering the doghouse in James Cook.
Yeah, so James Cook follows up here with 2 very disappointing weeks. Now, I understand he wasn't a high-value draft pick, but he was someone who we expected, at least if you went 0 running back strategy, he could be an RB2 for you. But he's put up 5 points and 7 points in back-to-back weeks. But the kicker here for me is against the Giants, he saw no targets in the pass game. And that is one of the higher upside things about James Cook, is that he is a great pass catcher, much like his brother in his prime, and he can get you those PPR points. But he just he put up a dud in the PPR department. And yes, 14 touches for 71 yards is awesome, but it doesn't do anything for you if he does not score in touchdowns or if he's not involved in the pass game. James Cook has 1 touchdown this year, so he finds himself in the doghouse.
Yes, and who does he play next week?
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, he plays New England and then Tampa the next 2 weeks. Now, New England's defense seems to always give the Bills fits, no matter how banged up they are, no matter what's going on. But Bill Belichick always usually plays his division pretty well. So I am not seeing good things coming from James Cook next week.
And up next, another guy entering the doghouse for like the 3rd time. This guy just can't seem to learn his lesson. George Kittle is back at the doghouse.
Yep, and I've been saying it. And believe it or not, this is George Kittle's second 1-point performance in the past 3 weeks. This is my coined phrase. This is not your dad's George Kittle anymore. George Kittle is, I mean, he's still a tight end 1. He's the tight end 8 after week 6. He's only really had 1 massive performance, and it was just a crazy efficient performance where he scored 3 touchdowns on 4 targets. That's obviously not going to probably happen again this season. I'm not bullish on George Kittle. We've seen too much inconsistency. There's been 4 single-digit point performances in 6 weeks. Not good enough for a tight end that you expect to be, more consistent, quite frankly. And he's going up against the Minnesota defense next week. There's nothing really special about him, but I have no reason to believe that George Kittle is going to hit his 11-point projection unless he gets a touchdown. Maybe Brock Purdy looks his way, maybe he doesn't, but I'm not betting on it.
Well, he is inconsistent, so history would show this week that maybe he will have a good game.
Actually, after 16-1, 27-1, so maybe he's due. It seems like it's an every other game for him.
The goal here, if you're a George Kittle owner, is let him pop off and then trade him. Trade him on his high week. You're not going to get anything for him now. So we'll move on to DeAndre Hopkins finding himself back into the doghouse. He had a good week. The week 5 against the Colts, that was really his only good week. We're going to just call that a what's the saying?
That was a DeAndre Hopkins was playing Paul Orlando's fantasy team, so he decided to go crazy. That's exactly what that was.
That's probably what he was thinking.
D-Hop's one good game was when I was playing the D-Hop owner.
Yeah, he fell back to his normal self here. Well, actually, this was a season low, 3 points against the Ravens, only having 1 catch. Still has not scored a touchdown this season. He's got a bye week, and then he's got Atlanta. I'm going to go ahead and say divisional game. DeAndre Hopkins finds himself in a
divisional game.
Oh, it's not. Oh, yeah, they're AFC South. That's right. So I'm going to say, since it's not a divisional game, that was my only reasoning. Like, hey, maybe they'll try and go to their best receiver.
And Tannehill got hurt also.
Ooh, okay. I'm going to say no, Bust Island.
Yeah, my Ravens defense is looking really good this year, guys. I think we're like number 1 and number 2 in most categories. So I love the Ravens. But next up here is Calvin Ridley. And after coming off a 20-point game in Buffalo, you were like, oh my God, he's so back. The super hyped, super everything, Jaguars wide receiver, electric offense, all this, yada, yada, yada. Well, Ridley gave us more of what we're used to seeing this year from him, unfortunately. Only 6.6 points. Crazy thing is, he saw 8 targets in this game, but only reeled in 4 catches for 30 yards. That is nowhere near what you want from him. Why does he have 6.6 points? He should have 7.
Why?
I think he lost yardage on a run or something.
Oh, okay. Okay. That makes sense then, because I'm like, why does he not have 7 points? That's a cool, crisp 7. But regardless, 7 points, 6.6 points. It is not enough to get the job done if you're Calvin Ridley, and especially if you invested. A guy in our league drafted him in the 3rd round, didn't he? Late 3rd round.
Yep.
Drafted him amongst other wide receiver 1 or a wide receiver 1 hopefuls here, and it's just not looking good. He does get a date in in New Orleans and then in Pittsburgh before his bye in week 9. And honestly, it's just so inconsistent with Ridley. It is a coin flip on whether he's going to produce a good game or not. There's no rhyme or reason to it. I'm just going to go with the trend and say that the Jaguars continue to struggle offensively, and Travis Etienne has been blowing up, playing super well. So I think they're going to ride the hot hand. I don't think Ridley will have a good game next week.
Saints defense is good too.
Yeah, totally. Bob, what do you think about Jamar Chase? He got to the doghouse, then to the portal, and he's back in. What is going on over there in Cincinnati?
Yeah, it's he didn't have a bad game in week 6, but again, it's all about where you drafted him and the expectation. He had 13 targets, which is great. You would expect more out of Jamar Chase, and he had 13 targets, but only 6 receptions for 80 yards, good for 14 fantasy points, finds himself back in the doghouse. And the Bengals regressed after their breakout performance against the Cardinals. The Seahawks were giving up, I'm pretty sure top 5 most fantasy points to the wide receiver position going into week 6. So you thought this would be a smash spot for Jamar Chase, and it just wasn't for the Bengals in general and Jamar Chase. And they have the bye in week 7, and then they get the Niners at San Francisco in week 8, and then Buffalo at home in week 9. Very tough schedule coming up. It's tough. It's tough because we haven't seen it from the Bengals this year, but I feel like coming out of the bye week with them being more healthy, working a little bit more, getting the rest. The Niners defense has been very good this year, but I don't think they've been as dominant as last season. And I think the Bengals will rise to the occasion with this tough schedule coming up, and Jamar Chase will get himself out of the doghouse in week 8. It's just, so far, it hasn't been the season that we expected from Jamar Chase outside of that one big blow-up game.
Yeah. And then to round this out, we already spoke about him. He finally got off Bust Island. He finds himself in the doghouse. That is Kyle Pitts. I'm going to go ahead and ride the hot hand here. I think you got to if you're a fantasy owner of Kyle Pitts. Granted, every week leading up for the first 4 weeks of the season, I was hating him, telling you guys to drop him. If you kept him, good for you. I think you just got to start him if you're a fantasy manager. This feels like a Justin Fields type of curse where once you start him, he sucks. And then you bench him and he goes off. Whatever. That could happen, but you got to do it. Kyle Pitts goes against Tampa Bay. And you just got to do it. That's all I'm going to say. And I'm going to say that he does meet his projection. It's still 9 points. So if he gets 10 points, he's tasting that fresh air. And maybe
he's got to perform well twice.
Yeah, right. He'll get one step closer to fresh air. So that does it for our Doghouse episode, guys. Thanks again for watching on YouTube, listening on Spotify and Apple Music. We greatly appreciate it. Go ahead, leave us a 5-star review if you're listening. Go ahead, subscribe to our channel if you're watching. And if you're listening, catch us on YouTube too. We got some good visuals here for you guys to enjoy. We will be back next week. Fantasy Awards, Doghouse. and a lot of short content on our TikTok and Instagram and Facebook pages. You can go ahead and follow us there as well. See you next week. Peace.
Peace.
See ya.